There is a new device which I thought was really interesting, and what it does is you get all your plastic, you can put it in like, it's kind of like a vat, something that looks very similar to the back of the DeLorean from Back to the Future, where you put all your rubbish. If you've seen it, haven't seen it, go see it. It's a great movie. And what it does, it burns it all down and turns it back into crude oil, and you can actually get your different levels of oil. So these devices do exist, thank God. Now, Paul, when you were starting your community, like, and trying to build it, what were your foundations that you were trying to get the communities aware of?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting thing because we didn't actually get to create a community. It was just more for research to find out what was working and what wasn't working. And it's about finding a space that's sustainable, that has good soil, that has good rainfall, that has access to natural flowing water. To find people that you can live with, that you can work with, that have the same understanding, the same philosophy.
So it's kind of like that Survivor TV show. You know, if you've got that one scheming guy, you don't really want him. Although he's probably going to win the TV show. Yeah. Don't know how. It's called Survivor. The guy who does nothing and who's the backstabber wins. I think they lost the plot in that show as well.
Which is interesting, Kris, because I was involved. I was one of the organisers for the Occupy movement when that happened.
Okay.
In Brisbane here. So it was interesting. Like, we basically had utopia for about 2 weeks. For the first 2 weeks. And then, like, it was a leaderless movement where it created its own rules and its own disciplines and its own philosophies. So it was an interesting process to observe, and and all these people sort of got drawn into this space because we had this, and it happened. It was the first movement in the history of the world where we had people standing up in about 2,000 cities right across the world. So we had the space where we had about 100 to 150 people living in this space in tents with a kitchen and a library and childminding and all.
I guess your friends, when your kids, you had to go do something, someone would look after your kids for you, and you were comfortable with them. Yeah, and you didn't have to pay for it because they felt comfortable giving you a hand, and then maybe you can cook them some food the next day.
So it was interesting. It was an interesting process, and then like how to deal with people. There were guidelines that people when it was meant to be a drug and alcohol-free space, and there's no violence, and how do you deal with that, and some of it was dealt with successfully, some of it was dealt with not so successfully.
Bit of teething.
Yeah, but like it's interesting, like to watch things evolve, and it's like what's the documentary about or the movie about the kids that are on the deserted island and
that one. I remember that movie. Lord of the Flies. You're talking about. They so went completely nuts.
Yeah. And that happened to a little bit of a degree as well. And, there were incidents of violence and bits and pieces where we're meant to be self-regulating. And, so it does one system evolve and then just get replaced by another system with the same structure and that sort of thing, And it's like, how do we create harmony and living in a space together where it's a true democracy, a democracy that's in a form that everyone actually gets to say and gets to contribute.
I guess this is the question. Do we really understand what democracy is? Now, Nina, you can piece some stuff together. Like, I have a feeling that maybe that we've been tried to be pushed away from understanding what real community is. Do you agree in that sort of sense through common like media and governments and that sort of stuff?
I believe that a lot of the media is used to distract people, but I think the way that communities would work is if every single individual would take personal responsibility for themselves and they would educate themselves on things that they need to know about. Not they wouldn't be watching sport, they wouldn't be watching news that's not really news. They would be learning about stuff like how to grow your own food, learning on getting to know their neighbours next door. You don't have to live in a community to be a community. You can be a community in your neighbourhood by getting to know your neighbours. There's so many ways that people can do that, but people are distracted and people are too busy working that they don't have time to think about that sort of stuff.
So it's kind of getting back to sovereignty upon yourselves. I guess we lost a bit of that ideal, or people don't realise that they actually are sovereign citizens and people. Because I guess a lot of people don't look into actual real law and constitution, like what a constitution is. Like I ask a lot of people, like, has anyone here read the Australian Constitution?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
You guys read it?
No.
I've touched on it, but,
See, but
it's not the most
I know.
exciting reading.
Well, this is the thing. Like, we don't get taught it at schools. Like, at school, I never got, hey, here's the Constitution of Australia. Here's what we understand, and this is the huge, like, most biggest guideline that you should base all your principles of existence living here on. You know, it's kind of that sort of thing.
I did a little bit of research around
Yeah.
it to find the fact that basically local councils have no jurisdiction under the Australian Constitution.
Well, that's true. I guess, like, a lot of the things that are put in place, we don't understand how they fully operate, and it does reflect us on our communities and how we reflect in nature, because we think a lot of the rules are there for protecting us when they're not really there. It's kind of like it gets a bit confusing, I think, especially when you look into like all the stuff about common law, you being a sovereign citizen, and what that means in regards to you and the government.
Well, this is an interesting thing too. I
Yeah.
was going to say, Chris, because the subjective interpretation of what sovereignty actually means, because
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing too, because
Yeah.
you can ask how many people and you'll get that many different responses. So it's people's, like, if you ask an Indigenous person what sovereignty means to them compared to, you know, I've had a lot of interesting conversations, particularly with First Nations people.
Yeah, well, these guys know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and some of them, like, they've been through a lot, you know, and it takes a lot for some of them to open up and even to trust again.
Well, especially like the white people. I
Yeah.
know this for a fact that, you know, they know so much. They're one of the smartest people on the face of the planet.
Absolutely.
But they're not going to let you know their knowledge until you're accepted.
Yeah.
And you can't gain that respect by just talking to them. You have to... It's kind of like a respect, a mutual respect and acknowledgement.
Yeah, because that's the thing I was going to say as well, because basically I spent the first 4 years of my life as the only white child growing up in an Indigenous community in Northern Territory.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. You've got a great viewpoint. Yeah.
Well, so I have huge amount of empathy there, and I've been involved with some of the Indigenous rallies closing down the communities in Western Australia to make way for big mining, for example.
Yeah, okay, wow.
But then I
Yeah.
have some of the Indigenous brothers and uncles say to me, look, your sovereignty finishes at the bottom of your feet. You need to, like, go back to wherever your lineage comes from, and then that's your sovereignty. So it's like, it's an interesting perspective of, like, actually what sovereignty means to different people, that subjective interpretation.
No, I think you're right. And I guess understanding where we fit in our communities, we have to understand ourselves. And this is where the sovereignty comes into it. Because I guess if we don't understand how we connect with our communities and with ourselves, this is where we get lost, I think, to begin with. Because I remember back in the 80s when I was a kid growing up, trying to grow a beard that's as majestic as now. I guess you guys at home can see that. I can give you tips if you need. But you know, we didn't lock our houses. You know, I would go and help the lady across the street sweep the leaves from her front yard because, hey, you know, I thought that was a thing. So we had a lot more community in Australia. It was amazing. You guys would have grown up through the 80s and known that sort of ideal. I guess the kids these days don't really understand, I guess, that sort of thing that we did a lot.
Well, the media has a lot to answer for in relation to creating separation between people and the lack of trust.
I think that's the case. Like, for you, Jason, as a kid, like, did you experience a lot of community, like, helping out, like, the old people down the road?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
What I can remember is that the people that I tended to, our family was friends with, had a connection to country, had a connection to the land somehow. And we've been talking a little bit around this. I can see that there's a sovereignty that goes beyond me, goes beyond my ancestors and other ancestors. A sovereignty for every decision I believe that we need to make at the present and in the future relates to how does country handle this? What does country want us to do? And more I'm noticing in Indigenous cultures from around the world, they have that, and maybe you've seen that too, Paul, and maybe you've seen that as well, that community, it's not something separate, it's not out there. I am part of it and it is part of me. And a key component is the land, is country.